what's up, comrades? Hope everyone's doing well. We're here to talk about Kay Nano's next book that I listened to on audiobook called The Villainess is an SS plus ranked adventurer. So if you can't tell by that ridiculous name, this is a comedy fantasy book. It's pretty good. So before we begin, let's go ahead and comment, like, subscribe, and share with your friends. So this book stars Juliet, who is a lazy, self-absorbed princess in a kingdom. I don't remember the name of the kingdom. And she's just sitting around eating like desserts when some random like commoner, according to her, walks up. He's actually a C-class adventurer, and he got kind of lost. And at some point it starts to rain, and she uses her sword, Starlight Grace, to keep herself from getting wet. And this guy's like, the fuck are you doing? And she's like, I don't like being wet. And he's like, you're doing that with your sword? You trained yourself? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, hold up. Let me sword fight with you. And she's like, no, I'm not a sword fighter. I don't know what I'm doing. And he's like, please, 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 please. And she's like, all right, fine. So then she beats the shit out of this guy, partially because she has some sort of ability where she like freezes time when she's being attacked with her sword, to the point where she can just like step out of the way and like ta-da, and like just really mess guys up. And then at some point he goes all out, quote unquote, and then he uses his like super move, his super named move. And then she sees that happening, and it kind of freezes, and so she decides to use like one of her very many named moves, which just decimates this guy and puts out like his fire attack. And he's like, holy shit, you're like the greatest, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, all right, cool, gotta go, bye, Z's. So her whole thing, Juliet's whole thing, is that she just likes being a noble, likes being the princess, likes being like the third princess in line and just chilling. Her brothers and sisters are engaged with like foreign affairs, but she just wants to sit, eat desserts, and chill the fuck out. And this sword, Starlight Grace, was given to her by her grandmother before she passed, and she just uses it for like cutting pastries and like keeping the rain off her and killing bugs and all this stuff. And she's developed all these like sword techniques, which are extremely powerful and OP, to like and using the sword. And the sword is also like an OP artifact level item or whatever. So that's pretty funny. And that's like where a lot of the sense of humor comes from. It's her just like thinking about peasants and doing stuff for the peasants and like gross peasants, and then being like a noble, but also not liking other nobles because she's the princess. And then, you know, being put in situations where she has to use like one of her extremely excessively powerful like attacks or whatever she's doing, which is always like game breaking, essentially. This is not a game, it's not an isekai at all, but it's like the general principle of the matter. Why is this not playing cold air? Anyway, not important. Okay, so it's a light novel. This one actually has a lot of chapters. There's like 28 something chapters. And then it's not a light novel. I thought it was a light novel because a lot of these audiobooks are light novels. This is like a web series. And so I think the web series, the audiobook of this, well, the web series got turned into like a light novel, or like a novel, like an actual novel or whatever. And it goes pretty far. So Juliet finds out that her parents are trying to marry her off to like some gross dude because they're broke. And they're broke because like the crops are there's like a wilting issue with the crops and this issue, and they took like a loan and they can't pay the loan back, and there's all this like sad times. And Juliet's like, I will not marry that man. And they're like, well, just think about it. And she's like, no. And so then she goes back to her room and she's like, all right, I'm going to go figure out what these problems are and solve them. And once I solve them, I can go back to just eating cakes and being pretty and not giving a fuck about doing work. And she's like, got it. That's what I'm going to do. So she does. So she dresses like a lower born noble woman and gets her sword and heads out. And the first thing she does is she bumps into one of her servants being extorted by like a criminal underground. And she quickly stops that from happening and takes the money that the guy was, you know, trying to extort from her servant, and is like, don't tell anyone about this. And he's like, hey, yeah, of course not. And so takes off. And then she wanders into like the local town. So we find out there's like the royal palace area. They don't call it a palace. She calls it like the villa. She calls it a royal villa. So there's like the royal villa with like the servants and like the servants' quarters and the guests and all that stuff. And then like right next door is like this poor farming town. So she heads over there and she wanders into like the tavern, and she's like, hello. And everyone's like, meh. And then she goes and talks to the barkeep, and the barkeep knows exactly who she is because he used to be an adventurer, and he's actually met the king and met her and all this stuff. And he actually likes her because, unlike all her brothers and sisters and the king and queen who just like ride through on their carriage and ignore everything, he makes a comment later on in his head to himself that he always sees her like looking out, like looking at people. Sometimes she stops the carriage to like see what's going on and to like ask a question to somebody or whatever. And she kind of talks about that too. She's like, oh, I don't like getting out. I've never really gotten out, but I like stopped and I like to observe and see what's going on and see how the peasants live, because it's my job as princess, is like third princess from the throne, to make sure that the people are taken care of, and that they're happy. And so she tells this guy that she's going to go figure out what's going on with the withering, and that she doesn't really know where to go. And he's like, we should go to this town. She's like, all right. So she gets up to leave, and he's like, hold up, you're just going to walk? And she's like, yeah, what else would I do? And he's like, take my horse. And horse is like Buttercup or something, and he's like his own caricature. He's very sassy with her and just generally. So they head on out, and she makes it kind of far, and then at some point she's like getting water or taking a bath or something. And then these like, I can't remember. No, she stops to get the horse water and to camp out or something. And then these brigands show up, and she's like, what are you guys doing? Let's see. And then she lets herself be taken by the brigands to their leader. Like they're like, oh, we're going to rape her and stuff. And she like talks down to them so much that they just believe that they can't do that. And she's like, let me take me to your leader. And they're like, I guess we got to do that. So they go. And they meet this guy, and this guy's like, who are you? What are you doing? And she's like, oh, I was sent here. And he's like, wait, were you sent by her? And then the princess is like, I don't know who this her is, but clearly this guy's scared of him. So, and then she does like a wicked like, ooh, hoo, 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 laugh. And is like, yes. And like, oh man, tell her we're almost got what we need. It's not a big deal. Like, she needs to leave us alone. Like, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, let me take all this treasure, and I think that will placate her for now, but you better get the rest of you, whatever you need to get immediately. And he's like, yeah, take it. And so she takes it all, puts it on the horse, and like BTFOs out of there. And then the guy later on is like, were we scammed? She has some thoughts about that whole situation. So the next thing is, okay, so she gets to the town, and she was given a letter by the bartender to go see his daughter, who's like an alchemist in this town, and also to see the guild master, because there's like a guild, right? Because it's like a fantasy world based on like a Japanese role playing game, so there's always a guild. So she goes to the guild master, meets him, gives him all the loot that she got because it was like bandits, and she wants it to be like returned or whatever. And she talks really badly about she doesn't like the guild because the guild undermines like the authority of the king, because they're transnational, and that it's kind of everybody relies on the guild to do stuff, and then a lot of times they're just doing like bullshit stuff, and they're almost like barely better than brigands. And so she doesn't have like a big fan. But then she talks to the guy, and he was like close friends with this other guy. And we also learned that the bartender was like an A-class adventurer at some point, and then the guy who was a C-class adventurer that fought the princess at the beginning, he comes strolling in after she's left at like the first bar, and he's like, oh my gosh, you can't believe it! I ran into this woman or this adventurer, or this lady, and she like gave me like a renewed spirit into becoming a better sword master and all this stuff, and I just wanted to come tell you about it because I felt it was so crazy. Like her skill in the sword was so powerful and so strong, and I'd never seen anything like it. Like it inspired me to be better, and all this kind of crazy stuff. All right, so going back, so the guild master's like, oh yeah, you gotta hold up. I missed something. So at some point in her travels over here to this town, maybe it was with the brigands, we meet Calabria, I think is her name. She's a puppet who works for a big library system in the world, and her sole purpose is to get books back, like books that have been checked up at the library, to get the book back and to get the fine for the book. And so that's what she's doing. She's out trying to find like a very particular book, and so they're both heading to like the same town. And so then they end up teaming up. I can't remember if she meets her before the brigands or after, but she's like also a comical character. And then Juliet, who now goes by Julia, so people don't know she's the princess. She thinks a lot about how this is like she's a great handmaiden, or it's like, well, she'd be a good servant. Oh, she'd be a good like something else, like a higher level servant, and then, oh no, she'll be a great handmaiden, like a second, like the woman who takes care of her directly, and she keeps referring to her that, and then the puppet lady's like, nope, that's not what I'm doing. So like hilarity ensues, right? This book is actually pretty humorous. I wouldn't say I ever like laughed out loud, but it was all pretty good times, and it was like funny in that sense. So I enjoyed it. But anyway, so after the guildmaster, she meets with the bartender's like daughter, who's an alchemist, and they're talking about the withering in the plants in this area, where there's just like plants just aren't growing, and there's some weird thing going on. And so she talks to the alchemist, and the alchemist is like, well, I could cure it, but I need this very special flower that's like in this dungeon, so we gotta go like in the sewer or whatever. And then Julia's like, oh, is there any other way? And she's like, no. And she's like, all right, fine. So then they head down to that area, and then they end up fighting a golem. And Calabria and Julia end up defeating the golem, and then the daughter, who's an alchemist, ends up like laughing or getting like very upset, laughing, and she's like, "I can't believe you beat my golem." And they're like, "Wait, your golem?" And then she starts casting like fire magic, and then Julia just like dismisses it, and then Calabria like pulls out like a scythe from like a portal that she creates, and then she starts trying to fight the mage, and then Julia's kind of just like watching, like, "Wait, what is going on?" And then this, the mage lady, who's the alchemist, who's the daughter of the bartender guy, she ends up using some, like, she starts to use, like, some super powerful, like, Medio Ultima magic kind of spell when Calabria's about to attack her, and then Julia, like, grabs Calabria and is like, no, look. And what happened is, right underneath her, there's a whole bunch of, like, these mana crystals, which, like, when you're using magic, they're going to explode. And so they, like, duck down to get out of the blast radius, and at the last second, the woman, like, realizes what she's doing and teleports out of there without, like, any of her clothes or whatever, and, like, the place kind of blows up a little bit. And which is unfortunate, because they found that, like, really rare flower, which, if nothing else, even if it's not going to cure the withering, they could have easily used it to sell for money, so they could have more money, or just take it back to the castle so it can sit in her like room and be pretty because no one else has it. And the money issue comes up a lot because she's pretending not to be the princess, and she's not like on an authorized quest essentially from her king, her mother and father. So she's constantly in the need for money, and then at some point she's like, "Oh, I gave all that money to the guild. I'll go get it back." And so she heads back there, and the guild's like, "Oh no, we already like turned it into the authorities." And she's like, "No." And then the guild master's like, "We could always become an adventurer and take quests." And she has this whole like inner monologue about like, how can I be an F class? She's like, all right, well, make me like the highest level. And the guy's like, no, you have to start off at F class. And she's like, F class, oh, the humiliation, whatever. And then she's about to like, nah, fuck it, I'm gonna go find something else to do. And he's like, hey, just because you're an F class adventurer doesn't mean you can't take like S class quests. And she's like, oh, really? Okay, fine, sign me up for this thing. Me and Calabria. And Calabria's like, no, I'm not gonna become an adventurer. I'm a puppet who just needs to get the book back. And but they eventually decide they're going to work together to find this book, and they cure the withering, because the withering was caused by this alchemist lady we find out is working for somebody else. Because after she teleports, she like comes back to her house, and she's trying to figure out, get her stuff together and figure out what went wrong, when someone else shows up and is like, we're very disappointed. And she's like, leave me alone, I got to figure this out. And she can't like reactivate the withering spell or whatever, so it's just going to fade, and the kingdom's going to be a-okay, and the crops will be successful after all. And stuff. And yeah, that's the book. I'm trying to think if there's anything else of relevance. But yeah, so Villainess is an SS plus class adventure. It was very good. It's a web novel originally, so I think you can find it in that regard and just kind of read it. I saw like the first chapter was floating around, but then I also saw on Reddit that at some point this K lady, she made a deal with like Amazon to put it on Kindle, and then she had to like scrub some of that stuff off the internet because now people got to pay for it, and Amazon's like very dictatorial in that manner. But it was pretty good. It was more humorous than Lily Claret, but I liked Lily Claret better. I feel like I had more. It was the same kind of like silly girl humor kind of stuff, or just kind of like, oh, do. But I like the characters better in that. This one, the characters seemed more one note, and particularly the main character seemed kind of one note. Even though she was fun, I don't know if I could get through like a long series with her, like maybe like a novel or a couple volumes of like a light novel before I'm like, all right, this is kind of like run its course. Like that's kind of how I was feeling when I was watching the Villainess. I was reborn as a Villainess in an Otame game, and all the death flags are raised or whatever. Is I watched 2 seasons of that, and I was like, this was like a little too much. Like it was funny the first season, and then the second season was okay, but by the end of the second season I was kind of tapped out of like the main character, who just like it's the same thing over and over again. It's like a sitcom, right? But like absolutely no growth or change, really. It's just like the same characters doing the same stuff in like slightly different scenarios. So I feel like this might go that same way, just based on what I was reading. I feel like Lily Claret had like a more of like an investigation or mystery thing going on. But I don't know. Maybe it gets bad after the first book or so. But yeah. So yeah, if you like fantasy stuff and you like a little more humorous, lighthearted tone, I'd say this is good. You should check it out. After the first book, I can't speak, but yeah, the first book was pretty good. Cool. Well, go ahead, like, subscribe, share, comment, and I will catch you guys later.